Lesson 9.2, Video 1, Simplifying Rational Expressions. So it's very important to understand from the beginning that we are dealing with expressions, and the difference between an expression and an equation is that with an expression there is no equal sign. So with expressions we don't solve. With expressions we just simplify. So again, a rational expression is an algebraic fraction whose numerator and denominator are polynomials. So the top and bottom are polynomials. Again, since division by zero is undefined, the polynomial in the denominator cannot be zero. So because of that, we have excluded values coming into play again. So if you look at the denominator in this example 1 here, we have 18n squared. So n cannot equal anything that causes this to become 0. And the only number that would cause that to become 0 is 0, because 18 times 0 squared is 0. So that would be considered an excluded value. In the second one, it's a little bit harder to see what it might be, but we go back to what we've done before to help us through something like this, and that is to factor. So if I look at this closely, in the denominator I have a polynomial where both terms have a 2v in common. If I factor a 2v out, I get v minus 1. So now this is the denominator. So I look at that and I say, what numbers would I or could I plug in that might cause that whole thing to become 0? So the number right here we can ignore because it's 2 times v minus 1. This, you would say, how can I get that to be equal 0? I would just make it 0. There's nothing changing that value. On the other hand, this part, I ask myself, how can that become 0? If I solve for v, because I have a minus 1 there, I realize that if v was 1, that would cause that parentheses to become 0 and cause it to be undefined. So the excluded values in this particular example, in other words, values that if we plugged into the v variable in this case to cause the denominator to be 0, numerator doesn't matter, I would write 0 and 1. Those are both considered excluded values. Now the biggest part of this lesson is simplifying rational expressions. So a rational expression is in simplest form when the numerator and denominator have no common factors except 1. They have nothing in common. To simplify a rational expression, factor both the numerator and the denominator and then divide out any common factors of the numerator and denominator. So factor first. Some examples here are, if I have BA in the numerator and CA in the denominator, the relationship between all the terms in numerator and denominator is multiplication, which means I am allowed the ability to cancel, which will give me B plus C. On our next one, if you notice, when I have a polynomial, I have an implied parentheses, which is like a force field. So I cannot be selective and say I'm going to cross out x's here. I cannot do that. I must factor first. If I factor the numerator, I see a 3 is in common. I factor that out and I get 3 times x minus 3. In the denominator I have a 4 in common. I factor the 4 out and I get 4 parentheses x minus 3. So now I have a relationship where I have taken the 3 out of the parentheses on top and I took the 4 out of the parentheses on the bottom. In other words, I took them out of their force field. And in doing so, I see that I have an x minus 3 in the numerator and the denominator. So now I can cancel out the x minus 3 in each position, and I'm left with 3 over 4. And this ends Lesson 9.2, Video 1.